Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this ACE Insight webinar organised by us, ACE, and our affiliate members, ForrestBrown, on the very important topic for hopefully everybody who's attending this webinar on research development tax credits. My name is Ian Parker, and I'm the Commercial and Affiliates Manager at ACE, and I'll just be overseeing the proceedings for the duration of this webinar. So, if you speak to our affiliates, ForrestBrown, then they'll tell you quite rightly that if it's done right, R&D tax credits can have a transformative impact on your businesses. And today, ForrestBrown will explain how you as AC members can also make use of those tax incentives and utilise it to its full potential. They'll also examine how, and as we all plan for the recovery post-COVID, that now is the perfect time to maximise your claim, and the 3 questions businesses should really ask to assess their claims. At the end of the presentation, there'll be a Q&A session. Please make sure that you use the chat box to post your questions, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as we possibly can. But don't worry if we don't get through all of your questions. I'm pretty sure that if you let us know that you want to talk to our colleagues at ForrestBrown, then we can either pass those details on to them, or you can get in touch with them directly, and I'm sure they'll welcome that opportunity to do so. So I guess from that point of view, there's just 1 or 2 little bits of housekeeping, which if you've been on webinars before, then you'll know that probably you'll be better off experiencing this if you're going through headphones to use headphones to cut out any noise, etc. Make sure you use the chat function in your control panel. As I said, we'll try and answer many of those as possible. Don't worry, we will put it on our website over the next few days. And if you want to listen to it again and then get back in touch with us for any further questions or any other issues that you want to raise, then that's not a problem at all. So without any further ado, I will hand over to our colleagues at ForrestBrown.
Thank you very much, Ian, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're thrilled to have you join us. We're talking about R&D tax credits today, and over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen an increase in the number of businesses who are making use of R&D tax credits, and I would expect that many of you today have explored them. However, we've seen a lot of instances where businesses are claiming R&D tax credits, but they're not claiming them correctly. And that means that they are leaving funding on the table or leaving themselves open to risk. And that's risk of delay in claims being processed, or even a Hmrc inquiry. So making sure that you are claiming correctly is vitally important. For those of you who haven't worked with ForrestBrown before, we are a specialist research and development tax consultancy. We're the largest specialist in the UK, and we work with many businesses across the engineering sector, helping to access funding through the government's R&D tax credits. So our work has created the equivalent of more than 15,000 technical jobs, and we are incredibly passionate about the positive impact that R&D tax credits have on our clients' businesses. We are an affiliate member of ACE, and we have a number of clients who are members, so we know firsthand that there is lots of innovation happening throughout the businesses belonging to ACE. Now, my name is Jack Wanstall, but I'm joined today by 2 of my colleagues from ForrestBrown, who are going to take us through the content of today's session. So firstly, we're joined by Gareth Randall, one of our engineering specialists.
Hi, everybody.
Gareth's role, Gareth, is to help our engineering clients to identify their R&D projects and specialises in presenting these projects in a technically correct way that Hmrc recognises. Before joining us, Gareth spent 20 years in the engineering sector and has worked on some notable and prestigious worldwide projects. It's his passion to help engineering businesses grow and to keep innovating. We're also joined by Jenny Tragner.
Hi.
Jenny is ForrestBrown's Technical Director. She sits on Hmrc's Research and Development Consultative Committee. Jenny began her career at KPMG and has specialised in R&D tax credits for well over a decade. She has also worked with the Chartered Institute of Taxation to produce new guidance on professional standards for research and development tax advisors, which was published earlier this year in June. Jenny works with both companies and accountants to make sure that they understand the intricacies of the R&D tax incentive. Now, Jenny, you've worked on R&D claims across many industries. Can you tell me why ForrestBrown is passionate about R&D tax credits in the engineering sector, and why is this such an important topic right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you say, Jack, at ForrestBrown, we're pretty passionate about R&D tax credits in general, and that's because we believe in them as a force for good, and because we see the transformative power of R&D tax credits across all sectors by working with our clients day in, day out. In the engineering sector in particular, we see a sector that faces a huge number of really complex challenges. It's incredibly diverse and fiercely competitive. And for us, this combination of factors really fosters innovation. We never cease to be amazed by the many varied examples of different R&D projects that our clients are undertaking in this sector. But we also know our sector very well. And unfortunately, it's one that is suffering at the moment from an influx of poor quality tax advice. More and more businesses and engineering businesses amongst them are reaching out to us because they've received poor advice, or they've had a bad experience with an R&D advisor, or worst case scenario, they've ended up facing pressing questions from Hmrc about their R&D claim. As a regulated firm of chartered tax advisors focused on giving quality advice, we very much feel that we have a responsibility to the tax incentive, to Hmrc, and most importantly, to innovative businesses. We're really driven to protect companies from bad advice and to help them to seek and to secure the full value of R&D tax relief to which they're entitled. And finally, although we don't want to make today's session about COVID-19, I'm sure we've all sort of heard enough, it can't really go unmentioned that it's an uncertain time for businesses in the UK at the moment. And the construction engineering sector has really had to adapt very quickly to the impact of the pandemic. We believe that R&D will play a crucial role in the recovery from the coming recession, and we believe that R&D tax credits provide vital funding to businesses to protect their R&D investment.
Thanks, Jenny. Now, ForrestBrown has always championed the engineering sector. So when we kept hearing that firms felt their everyday work didn't qualify, or that their time investment didn't match their R&D tax credit, we wanted to help. And so the agenda of today's webinar is to explore 3 important sense checks that you can make to ensure that your business's R&D tax credit claim are maximized and, just as importantly, protected from risk. But first, though, I think let's remind ourselves how to spot R&D activity, as even businesses that have been claiming for years often overlook qualifying costs and are missing out on significant funding. Now more than ever, we feel it's important that businesses don't miss out. Now, before we go into the detail on spotting R&D, Jenny, as a chartered accountant, can you briefly touch on the government's definition of research and development?
I'd absolutely love to. So the definition itself is lengthy. It's around 12 pages long. It's been around since 2004. And as an R&D tax advisor, it's something that Gareth and I live and breathe every single day. I could probably spend the next 3 or 4 hours talking to you guys in detail about it, but Jack and Ian would get very angry with me. But what we find is many businesses struggle to apply it to their day-to-day work. And I think this is in part why. In summary, the definition says R&D takes place when a project seeks to achieve an advance in science and technology through the resolution of scientific or technological uncertainty. And trust me, that's not as easy to say as I just made it sound. So it's not simple, but I think the best way to think about it is to look at the 3 key criteria that this summary gives us. A project, so something that you set out to achieve, and a set of steps that you followed to get there. An advance, so that could be something entirely new, or more commonly, particularly in engineering projects, it's making something that already exists better than it was before. That could be a product, but quite often it's about a process that you followed and that you've improved upon. And uncertainty, that means your technical people have looked at the standard ways of doing this and they've determined that the answer isn't out there. So you've had to come up with it yourself. You've taken a risk that you'll be able to figure out the answer. And crucially, your work is R&D whether or not you actually do go on to figure out that answer. So the definition is designed to apply to R&D across any sector, but how it achieves that is to use language like you can see on the slide there. And that actually puts a lot of businesses off and prevents them from identifying all of their qualifying projects and activities.
And there are many myths about engineering R&D that are holding companies back from spotting it in their own work. Gareth, could you take a few minutes to address for the audience a few of those often overlooked areas that businesses can in fact claim R&D credits for?
Sure, thanks, Jack. And I think one in particular that's really been on my radar for a while now is looking at failed or lost tenders or incomplete projects. So I think if you kind of, and I realize a lot of people are claiming already, but if we go back to basics here. So generally speaking, R&D can be taken on knowingly, or often it can ambush you. But we'll talk about the latter in a moment. But looking at two very common scenarios. So first off, how about in an instance where you take on a project knowing upfront that it's really going to test your abilities, but at the same time allow you to be creative. I mean, even though your insurance company is probably not going to like you for it, but you do all the technical work, you have the sleepless nights, and then once the construction budget is done, the client decides no, and he pulls the plug and wants to make it simple or just outright cancels the project. That happens a lot. Now, a second scenario, you are on a project and you're trying to break new technical ground. You don't know how you're going to do it, but you're a professional problem solver and you'll back yourself to figure it out. You battle away, you methodically try to reach a successful resolution. But unfortunately, on this occasion, it just doesn't work out and you have to revert back to the tried and tested. So in both scenarios, the knowledge and experience that was gained could be offset against future projects and can still be an example of trying to progress beyond the industry baseline, what Jenny was talking about in terms of an advance. So now, as mentioned earlier, R&D can also catch you unaware. So again, in a scenario where you take on a commercial project thinking it will be relatively straightforward, but then as you start progressing, certain technical aspects can become highly problematic, and it'll require your experienced senior heads to spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to seek a resolution. So in a position like this, where you have little to no technical guidance or inspiration to work with, you're potentially going to have to carry out R&D work to get back on track. So that's failed and lost tenders or projects. So maybe, Jenny, do you want to look at myth number 6 is a good one, I think.
Yeah, I think that myth Gareth talks a lot about triggers for R&D, I think, which is really helpful. But what we do find, I'm going to pick up on a couple of the other myths there, is companies that identify that they're doing some R&D, they tend to then end up at one end or other of the scale. Either they conclude that everything they're doing is R&D, and more on that later on, but more commonly in the engineering sectors in particular, they end up focusing only on that eureka moment. So the reason that final myth there says feasibility, planning, testing phases of a project, it's about getting the boundaries of your R&D project right. And there's a really good way to understand where those boundaries should be. And it's actually within the definition of R&D for tax purposes itself. It clearly defines a number of qualifying indirect activities. So planning is specifically included in there, but as is administrative work, budgeting, and even some HR activities. So these sorts of indirect supporting activities, they give you an outer boundary of an R&D project, and they really give you a good idea of how broad you should be drawing those boundaries. And those activities translate into costs, and those costs do add up, and they can make a really meaningful increase to a claim. But I think, Gareth, you're going to finish on probably the most common myth we hear from engineers in our job.
Absolutely, yeah. So the number one really is doing your normal job, building stuff or doing engineering work. So I mean, really, I mentioned it earlier, but as an engineer, you are a professional problem solver. So what needs to be clarified really in this scenario is firstly the nature of the problem, and secondly the method that you use to solve it. So in R&D, we're not talking about everyday routine type of problems, the ones where you could just use your engineering judgment or gut feel and then leave it to one of your junior staff to deal with it. With R&D, we're talking by definition about complicated or complex problems where you as an experienced professional will have no obvious answer, and to solve it, you will require a planned and methodical process. So in this case, your senior professionals are going to have to roll up their sleeves and really prepare to get their hands dirty. So the difficulty of this, of course, practically in the workplace, is that it often wrecks the profitability of a project. It escalates your risks. You can often result in program delays and construction problems. And I mean, in an ideal world, some sort of financial compensation can be agreed with the client, but as you know, it's very often not the case. I can certainly think of several projects I've worked on personally where this has happened, and having the benefit of the R&D tax incentive to lean on would have made a huge difference when those projects almost without fail were loss-making.
Thank you both. Now that leads nicely onto our next section, where we'll be identifying 3 ways to sense check your R&D claim. And we often see businesses fall foul of 3 particular areas when it comes to claiming R&D tax credits, and these center around value, risk, and time. And we're going to look now at the steps that your business can take to ensure that you are claiming correctly. So check 1 is looks at value, and we touched on how to identify R&D, but as we know all too well, businesses that are already claiming can still miss qualifying work. And Gareth, can you elaborate on this?
Sure, thanks, Jack. I will do. The thing is, we regularly meet businesses who aren't identifying all of their potentially qualifying activity, and what they've been doing then effectively is leaving money or funding that they're entitled to on the table. So really, because of this, I can't emphasize enough how important the discovery stage of your claim is. This often involves a recap of what Hmrc are open to, then an initial high-level discussion around the projects with the right people on both sides. I think the critical part with your current provider really is to make sure that you've got access to the industry sector expertise that you need, as well as the qualified tax advisors. In doing this, you ensure that all your qualifying projects and costs are uncovered. So for ACE members, that means making sure whoever is involved with your claim preparation has in-house technical experience to bridge that gap between technical knowledge and the finance side of things for you. So somebody who understands the ins and outs of engineering projects and can really ask the right leading questions of your technical style.
Yeah, and I can't support enough what Gareth just said there about that discovery and assessment phase, the identification of your R&D projects being really important. Too often we see not enough time being spent on that phase, or worse, sometimes it being skipped entirely. And one point I'd also pick up is what's on the slide there is our end-to-end claim process, which is the way that we work with many businesses. But we also deliver targeted consultancy projects to many of our clients, either because they prepare their claims in-house, or sometimes we work alongside their main accountant or tax agent. So we're able to insert our sector expertise at the right stages in the claim preparation process to complement the support that they're already receiving or the work that they're doing in-house. So if you do prepare your claim in-house, or if you work with your accountant, we'd be really happy to have a conversation and see whether there are any areas where we can offer additional support and flex our services to best support you.
Absolutely. I think, and Jenny, I think there was recently we had that example of the claim that came in from another R&D advisor, again, where they hadn't fully scoped out all the client's projects, and we ended up being able to uplift their claim value by something like 15 times what it would have been originally.
Yeah, we did. And I'm smiling because Gareth and Jack both know that the last thing I would ever do is stand up here or sit down here and promise that ForrestBrown's process can always make any existing claim bigger. That's just not true. For me, the experience with PSS was more about their experience. Their claim process previously had really been a drag. It was an annual compliance exercise that they'd come to dread each year. And to top that off, they barely even noticed the amounts that they had claimed hitting their bank account. So not exactly the sort of transformative power that we talk about when we look at R&D tax credits. So really what we tried to do primarily was improve their experience. And as we keep saying, that meant getting the right people on our team engaged with the right ones on theirs. We didn't ask their engineers to write up any lengthy reports on their projects. We didn't ask their finance team to fill out any fiddly spreadsheets. We put our people in there and we sought to understand how, why, and where R&D was taking place within that business. And that process led to a more enjoyable experience for them. And the icing on the cake was that there was also a substantial increase in the claim value. So done right, we genuinely believe that R&D tax credits can have a transformative impact on a business. In this case, we were able to secure this company the right amount of relief, and our client can now use that to invest in fueling more innovation. And that's why we do what we do.
So making sure that the discovery and assessment is very important, as we've said there, but are there any other ways, Jenny, that you would look to check that a claim is fully optimized?
Yeah, millions. But the main question I would ask any company that is already claiming is, does the value of your claim accurately reflect your investment in innovation? That might be a tough question to answer, but it's really worth giving some thought to, and it can be an excellent way to identify whether there's any untapped value within your claims. If you're using an advisor to support your claim, I would say know that there are lots of R&D providers out there, and you might feel that they seemingly have similar offerings, but in fact, the service that you receive can differ significantly. So ask yourself these questions. Do you have full visibility of the team who will be advising you? Who do you see and speak to during the process? Who's actively involved from your advisor in the claim process? As Gareth has touched on, it's really important that you have access to the right expertise at the right point in the claim process. For us, that means a multidisciplinary team, so that engineers are speaking to engineers and tax people are speaking to finance people. And secondly, do you really understand the what and the why of your R&D claim? No advisor can absolve you of all the risk inherent within your claim. So do they provide their findings to you and explain them? Absolutely crucially, they should be sharing any reports that they're going to send to Hmrc with you and making sure that you've reviewed and understood and approved those before they file them with the revenue. So if the answer to any of those questions is no, I would say it's certainly worth seeking a second opinion. And completing these checks each year when you think about your R&D claim, they're not only about ensuring that your claim value is optimized, but they're also going to indicate if you're claiming the correct amount. And I think that segues us neatly onto the next section, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. So check 2 is all about how to protect your business from risk. And first things first, there is risk inherent in any claim for R&D tax credits, but by choosing a provider, a quality provider with expert knowledge of the tax legislation, businesses can minimize the level of risk that they are exposed to. Now, in recent times, we've seen a change of tack from Hmrc. Their emphasis has shifted from raising awareness of the incentive to policing quality. And the result of this shift for businesses is that you should not be resting on your laurels. If you've been making a claim successfully for a few years, it's easy to think that you can repeat the same process time and again. But as a consequence of this change in Hmrc's approach, that's not the case anymore, is it, Jenny?
Alas, unfortunately not. So R&D tax relief has been around for 20 years now. And if you rewind 3 or 4 years, Hmrc were very much on a major awareness raising campaign. They'd recognised that many eligible companies were failing to claim the relief, either because they simply didn't know that it was there, or they'd looked at it and been instantly put off, probably by that wordy definition that I spoke about earlier. But that really all changed in around 2018, following a case where Hmrc spotted a really significant fraudulent scheme which aimed to exploit the incentive. And as Jack said, this has resulted in something of a seismic shift in Hmrc's approach away from awareness raising and towards quality of claims. So to help them do this and crack down on poor quality claims, one thing they've done is taken on significant additional compliance resource. So they're the people within Hmrc whose sole focus it is to open inquiries into R&D tax claims, to review them, and to make sure the right amount of relief is being given. We're seeing many businesses who have claimed for a number of years and never had any contact from Hmrc now finding themselves facing detailed questioning. And sometimes that can really take them unawares. So if you are claiming, our advice is now would be the time to check that you're comfortable with the process that you're following and what you're putting together, And if you're using an advisor, make sure that your chosen advisor is well informed, acutely aware of what it is HMRC are looking for, that they're up to date with the shift in HMRC's approach and those expectations. Because nobody likes to think about the worst case scenario, but and an inquiry isn't necessarily the worst case scenario, but an inquiry where you are underprepared for the questions that HMRC ask and what they expect of you is the worst case scenario. HMRC's powers are quite substantial. If they find errors, they will consider whether they need to charge a penalty. If they find errors and they think that those errors were existed in earlier claims, they will look at whether they should be unpicking those earlier claims as well. So if you're not comfortable that you're fully up to date and aware and confident of the information that HMRC need from you in the event of an inquiry, then now would be the time to ask yourself how you can get up to speed.
Yes, and on the screen now, we have a checklist that we have put together and that we would recommend any business to use to review the level of R&D tax credit expertise that you are receiving. Gareth and Jenny, could you tell us the importance of these points here?
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in on point one because we've mentioned this a couple of times. So if you're working with an R&D advisor, are they accountable to a relevant professional body? At ForrestBrown, we're a regulated firm of chartered tax advisors. We're accountable to the Chartered Institute of Taxation. And what that means is what you would expect as engineers. We're accountable to an ethical code that informs our processes and our behaviours. It informs the qualifications of our staff and how we structure our client teams, but it also informs the training that we give our staff. And it informs everything from our know your client and AML procedures right through to the working practices and the processes we follow to prepare a claim. And what does that mean for you as a client? Well, it means that you're afforded the protection of knowing that there is oversight there from a professional body that has incredibly high expectations for the way that we behave. And if we fail to meet those expectations, that our professional body will step in and they will ensure that we continue to uphold those standards.
I think I'll take on number two then, because that relates to me. So look, I touched on this earlier, but from a client's perspective, when you have a technical person communicating technical R&D in layman terms, it can be an incredibly frustrating experience. So firstly, you won't know that the right technical filter is being applied to your projects to separate routine from non-routine work. And when that happens, you're either going to over-egg your claim or you're going to leave qualifying work on the table. So being able to talk peer-to-peer with a sector specialist on your advisory team is essential. And now, secondly, all of this valuable technical information has to be conveyed back to HMRC. So the likelihood is that it's going to be read by a non-technical inspector. So again, comes the importance of having an advisor who has a sector specialist on their team. And they will then take the role of making sure that that valuable technical information is conveyed in the correct way, which again minimizes the risks of HMRC raising further questions or a formal inquiry. Now, I think it's probably a good time to jump on to number three as well. Do they avoid generic questionnaires and templates? So again, look, I understand why generic questionnaires and templates are used. But the problem again comes back to understanding the full complexities of an engineering project and then conveying it to HMRC. So if your advisor gathers their information by generic template, then your claim is going to have a generic outcome. I just struggle to see how you can ever fully represent technical work without having a direct conversation with an industry peer who can grasp the context and extent of the R&D work that you've been doing. So at ForrestBrown, what we typically do is firstly have an early engagement to discuss a number of projects at high level, ideally with, if that's in person, with your team in your office. But of course, this year it's been different. So we've been managing to do that quite well with virtual calls. But using those filtered projects, we'll then pick out the best representation of your R&D work. We'll have a one-on-one chat with the technical people involved. And then we'll pull together a very clearly motivated case study or number of case studies for HMRC. I wonder, Jenny, do you want to have a chat about number four, I think?
This is probably my cue to jump in. So number four says, can they demonstrate a good relationship with HMRC? So ultimately, HMRC are administering the relief. They're the ones that are going to review your claim. So you'll want to know that they're getting what they expect to receive, what information they need to be able to review and be comfortable to process the claim. And at ForrestBrown, we feel that there are three distinct ways that we demonstrate and achieve a good relationship with Hmrc. The first is simply the volume of claims that we deal with. So we're advising a couple of hundred businesses a month, which means we're in constant contact with Hmrc's operational staff. It means we've got our finger on the pulse of what it is that they need, of the processes that they follow. The second goes a step further. We've actually got 2 ex-Hmrc R&D inspectors on our team, and they give us a fascinating but very valuable insight into the inner workings of the mind of an Hmrc inspector. And they play a really active role in our quality assurance processes, making sure that our process meets Hmrc's expectations. And the third is really a bigger picture point. So for us, it's about taking a proactive role in wider discussions about R&D tax incentives. We've spoken about being a passionate advocate of the incentive in general. And that's about our membership of Hmrc's R&D Consultative Committee, which is where policy and operational decisions are discussed and made that affect R&D tax credits, but also responding to government consultations on changes to R&D tax credits, and being members of various working groups that have informed the direction of R&D. And one example of that is a group that we formed last year with our professional body, the Chartered Institute of Taxation. And it was really in response to feeling that we had a responsibility, having seen the negative impact of spurious advisors and poor tax advice within our market, to take action. So we formed a working group with the professional standards team at the Chartered Institute, and we looked at setting the minimum expected standard of behaviour, professional standards for advice in R&D tax, the R&D tax advice market. And I'm pleased to say that culminated, I think Jack mentioned it earlier in the introduction, in publication of some guidance that's specific to R&D tax advice that has been endorsed by all of the main tax and accountancy professional bodies, and mentioned by Hmrc as a good example of what they expect from the behaviour of an advisor. And this, for me, sort of segues on to point 5, which I think is a really important point there. And I said earlier, when you're entering into making a claim, nobody wants to think about the worst case scenario, and only a modest percentage of claims are picked up for detailed review by Hmrc. But I would urge you, when entering into a relationship with an advisor, to understand what happens when you're reviewing any contract. Always look at it from the perspective of, if this goes wrong, what protections am I being afforded? So in this case, if your claim goes to inquiry and you've relied on the advice of an R&D specialist, will they support you in defending that claim if Hmrc open an inquiry? And things to look out for, the examples that we've seen that make us uncomfortable in the R&D market, anything from sort of hidden clauses in the contract that mean that you're exposed to additional fees for supporting with an inquiry, right through to some absolutely terrible examples where we've met companies whose advisor has walked away mid-inquiry, so disengaged with them or just not been available to support with the queries that Hmrc is asking, and left the company or quite often their accountant alongside them to pick up the pieces. So make sure that you understand what support you will be afforded from an advisor before you enter into an agreement. And at ForrestBrown, it's really important to us that our relationship with Hmrc is as important to us as our relationship with our clients. So it's important that we do support the work that we do. And that's why in our end-to-end claim service, full inquiry support is always included within the fee as standard. There are no hidden extras there. And we've got a dedicated in-house advisory practice that delivers our inquiry support service to clients where we haven't prepared the claim. So maybe they prepared it in-house or by another advisor and found themselves facing an inquiry. And that specialist expertise is available to all of our clients if Hmrc ask any questions on their claim. And pleased to say that we have a very good success record with resolving inquiries, both internal and external support.
Thank you, guys. So to continue to think about how to protect your business from risk, Hmrc's sharp and focused on quality means that it's more important than ever that companies submit the right information as part of the claim. Gareth, as the technical specialist on many engineering claims, can you talk us through the importance of quality assurance in that process?
Yeah, sure, will do, Jack. And I think, as Jenny was saying now, and really, there's that risk of if you're not checking this thing properly, you're then running the risk of submitting to Hmrc a document which potentially puts you on the wrong foot with them and could potentially damage your relationship with them. So when it comes to independent QA, I mean, it's really the same as in engineering. You can't check your own work. So at ForrestBrown, we have a QA team which sits independently from our delivery team, and their job is essentially to come in from the cold, look at this with an independent view, and be able to sense check that claim at every step along the way, both technically and when it comes to the number side of things. As Jenny was mentioning as well, we've also got two ex-Hmrc inspectors. They work alongside us, and they'll help sense check and review the claims and documentation that goes with it. And I think perhaps one other very important thing to mention is that, again, sort of touching on what Jenny was saying, any reputable advisor should be submitting the final claim documentation for you, to you for review and approval before it actually goes back to submission to Hmrc. So again, it's something that's integral to our claim preparation process. And yeah, I can't see how we would ever submit a claim without getting that initial sign-off from the client.
Now on this slide, we have a quote. It's from one of our clients. And Gareth, why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah, sure. Again, it's very nice of them, but again, it's a great example of an engineering consultancy sense checking an advisor's ability to manage their R&D claims. So this client of ours was, well, rightly, he was very cautious about getting on the wrong side of Hmrc, and they really wanted a provider who could demonstrate a strong knowledge of Hmrc's processes. So in this example, it was the expertise and experience of our team and our reputation in this area that gave them a real peace of mind that their business was protected. So really the moral of the story when it comes to something like this is do your market research, make sure that your advisor is a good fit for your business, and then reassess that year on year.
So that brings us on to check 3, which is around time. And are you spending too much of your time on preparing your claim? And based on our conversations within the industry, this is a big issue that's faced by a lot of engineering firms. So how can you know or gauge if you're spending too much time on your claim?
So I think I'll step in here, and this is a subject that's quite close to my heart. I think one thing I would say is that if you're outsourcing your claim preparation, many advisors will limit their time commitment by taking more of yours. And for me, it's not so much about how much time you're spending, it's about spending that time effectively and not dreading the process, making it an experience that, yes, is thorough and robust, but is also non-onerous. And if that's the way that you feel about your R&D claim, I think that hopefully today has sort of kicked you to have a think about how things could potentially be done differently. And one thing that Gareth spoke about earlier in terms of the process is identification of R&D projects. So if you are not spending time there, or if you are being asked to spend all of your time there and not getting the right support from your advisor, and if you're then being asked to write up lengthy technical narratives, to fill in spreadsheets, to do the costs yourself, ask yourself what value your advisor is adding. We see that upfront discovery and information gathering phase of the process as really critical in terms of your time input. And then as a specialist, what we aim to do is take the legwork in-house. So we make that process efficient by gathering the information in an engaging way. And that's back to having the right people on our side, talk to the right people on your side. So your engineers are not spending time trying to explain their project to me and having me not understand it and having to ask them to explain it 15 times. They're explaining it to Gareth, who will understand it and will be able to translate it into a format that Hmrc will recognise. So for me, it's about finding a specialist or finding an advisor that will make the process efficient and effective for you. We take the view that the people that are needed to prepare an R&D claim are far more valuable in your business doing their day job. And so that's where our process aims to minimize their time commitment and take the legwork onto our team if we can.
You make a really good point there, Jenny, and I guess it goes without saying that if you were to do the claim yourself, it could take a long time. Could you quickly talk us through this slide and sort of how long a business could expect to invest in ForrestBrown's claim process?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say about this slide is this is absolutely not us telling you that this is the optimal amount of time that you should spend at each phase in the process. We're very much recognise that each of our clients is unique. But this is, as I was saying, to give you an indication of where, if you're using a specialist advisor, where your time commitment should be. And it should be upfront with the right support to use that time effectively. And as I say, try to make sure that the process isn't a drag for you or for your team. And so we think that's down to having the right people available to you, and you can see some of their smiley faces on the slide there. So that includes sector expertise, hi Gareth, and tax expertise, independent quality assurance support, and even dedicated client relations specialists that bring that process together and make sure that your time is used effectively. If you worked at ForrestBrown, would you expect your input to take no more than 6 to 8 hours, as is there on the slide? That's across, or almost always across, a number of people within the business. So one thing that's unique about R&D tax claims in the field of tax advice is that it always requires input and engagement from the technical side of the business, as well as support from financial staff. But as I said at the beginning, I'd absolutely caveat this with each business is unique, and it's really about the structure of your business, what your claim looks like, and what it is that you want to achieve. If you're preparing your claim yourself, then expect to dedicate more of your time to preparing the documentation for Hmrc to make sure that that is right. Perhaps slightly more time to the discovery and assessment if you want to make sure that you're fully maximising the claim. And that's really where we see sort of a significant part of our value add, is understanding how to translate your business information across to Hmrc in a format that they recognise with the information they're expecting to receive, so that hopefully the claim can be processed nice and smoothly.
Thank you, Jenny. Now, lots of the engineering clients that we have today were already making use of R&D tax credits, either by claiming themselves or via another provider, but ultimately they made a decision to switch. And we have an example here where that decision was largely driven by the time investment that this particular business was having to make to prepare their claim. Gareth, can you tell us more about this particular case study on the slide now?
Yeah, I will do, Jack. I think, again, this was an example which really hit all of the notes that we've spoken about so far today. So again, it was all down to being very bureaucratic and having to do a lot of form filling, basically doing all the hard work on the client side of things. Then when it came back onto reviewing it in terms of putting a claim together, there's a lot of I suppose skepticism or lack of understanding of the technical background to what they were trying to put forward. And this was a very technical company that we were dealing with. So again, they didn't feel that they were being listened to, and that the correct, again, filter was being applied to this. So eventually they decided that this was becoming too onerous, and decided to look around and find somebody who could understand what the type of problems that they were dealing with here and the type of work that they were doing. So at least once this came across to us, we're able to then actually do the heavy lifting. We're able to then make it a more enjoyable process. We could then discuss these issues with them peer-to-peer. And again, in this instance, this is the project we're talking about, or the client we're talking about, who we managed to substantially increase the size of their claim. And I think something else to watch out for is just also that end-to-end service. So again, at ForrestBrown, our approach really is to follow it all the way from that initial integration and discussion of the project ID, all the way to then actually submitting it to Hmrc. So rather than making it difficult for the client and sending it all over to them and making it also a bit more of a time commitment, which they weren't expecting. So again, it was a happy client in this scenario. They were able to come to us, and they found that it's now, instead of becoming a bit of a chore, it ended up becoming quite an enjoyable thing for them and something that they actually look forward to doing every year.
Thanks, Gareth. Now we're going to move on to Q&A shortly, but Jenny, do you have any final comments for the audience today before we go to questions?
Yeah, I see you've asked them to direct all of their questions to me and none to Gareth. So I'd say I in particular have talked a lot about risk today, and I would absolutely urge you, if you're claiming, to be aware of those risks that we've mentioned. Remember that your R&D claim is part of your wider tax filing with Hmrc. It's subject to the same expectations from them for its accuracy and robustness. They can and they do check R&D claims, and they're doing it more and more in the current environment, and they have wide-ranging powers to ensure compliance with the rules. Things go south, it's ultimately you, the business, that will be on the hook for the accuracy of your claim. Hmrc will expect you to be able to defend it, and it remains your responsibility even if you do use an advisor for the preparation. So I'd urge you to take the time to choose the right advisor if you do want support with your claim, and to think about a service that fits your business, be that an end-to-end outsourcing of the claim preparation or a more flexible way to engage with the right expertise to make sure that your claim is robust and it's fully maximised. Look at the sense checks that we covered earlier. And I guess just finally, to end on a more positive, please do get in touch. As Jack said, we're affiliate members of ACE, and we're really keen to hear from members and to speak to you and to hear your experiences and your questions.
Everyone for joining us. We do have some time now for some Q&A. So if you have a question, we'd love to hear from you. Please send them in.
Okay, thanks for that, ForrestBrown. I do have some questions that have come through. I've got one there from Andy in Durham, actually. I think he touched on it. To be quite honest, I think a lot of the questions, the comprehensive nature of the presentation there, a lot of these questions are probably answered, but it might need perhaps some clarification. It might be, and individually they might want to get in touch. But Andy in Durham wants to know, how long do Hmrc have to ask questions about a claim?
That's probably one for me to pick up. So in general, they have a window of 12 months from the submission of your claim to ask any questions. And crucially, that it doesn't matter whether they've actually processed and paid out any credit or tax refund due. They still have that 12-month window, which is quite a substantial length of time to challenge. And I think it's also worth remembering, not realizing that I'm starting to sound like the harbinger of doom, that if they do open an inquiry and they look at your latest claim, if they find a significant problem there, they do have powers to look back further, in some cases up to 6 years worth of claims, and potentially unpick any errors that they find. And so really the advice would be, it's in your interest to get things right now, so that they're getting the information they want and they don't need to come back and inquire into that next claim.
Thanks, Jenny. Marcus Rebel asks that he's spoken to some companies and said they write an in-depth technical report alongside the claim. Is it relevant? And if so, what is it? I know that I think you touched upon that, but I guess you want to know specifically how relevant an in-depth report would be.
Jenny, do you want me to pick up on that one?
Yeah, I think that's
thing?
Your skill, Gareth.
Good. At least we'll share it out. You've had all the questions so far. So, okay. So basically, when it comes to the technical report, so we will be so as part of this, like we'll pick out key case studies that go through with the submission. Now, the trick is, and it sounds funny. I mean, when you come across some of this work that we're dealing with, half the time you can actually probably write a thesis with this thing. But what Hmrc will want is effectively almost an abridged version, and they want to understand the thought process that you went through, and that your thought process when it comes to R&D is in alignment with the Hmrc, with their BIS guidelines. So it isn't, when we say in depth, it's enough to demonstrate to them that you're thinking and that you're in line with what they want, and it gives them sufficient technical depth to demonstrate to that to them without going too far, should I say. They do have word limits on it, so we will pick that up and basically arrange it in a way where it really conveys it to Hmrc in a succinct fashion, but really demonstrates to them that you as the client understand what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's what you mean by in-depth. They do expect the information to be at a fairly technical level, but they don't like reams and reams of information. So if in-depth means pages and pages and pages of information about the project, then you're probably not getting it right for them. But equally, we also see companies kind of not hit the right level of technical detail in that technical report. So it's about getting the right information across in the fewest words, which can be quite a skill.
Another attendee says that it started with a small engineering business with no employees. It's a turnover of less than 75,000. Can tax benefit sufficiently offset the cost of the services that he employs?
I think the short answer to that is yes, potentially. But I mean, to pick up on a couple of points, personnel costs. So we've talked a lot about R&D activities, and those activities generally translate into personnel or labour costs. So they often make up the largest proportion of your claim. So it's not really turnover that we look at. And actually, we work with a number of startup businesses that are pre-revenue, so have no turnover at all, but they're investing in substantial funds into R&D. So if there's no employees, then what we'd want to do initially is to have get a better understanding of the cost base within the business at the moment to give you a feel for the likely level of the benefit. And then, as we said before, our end-to-end claim service, typically it works on a success fee basis, so we'd only ever be taking a proportion of the benefit to you anyway. But there are also lots of different ways that we can work with businesses, particularly in those early stages. If the amounts are quite small, then we can look at flexing our services to give you the support that you need that matches the risk profile of that claim.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Somebody else is asking, how would Gareth or maybe somebody else from your technical team engage with the business on the R&D claim? How would you go about engaging with that organisation?
Okay, so yeah, from a technical side of things, basically, obviously things are a bit difficult now in during lockdown, etc. But the usual way is to normally pop down to the office, or your office, or for an hour or two, or ideally, in an ideal world, to go off on a site visit, if that's a possibility. And what we tend to find is it's quite mutually beneficial, really. So from our side, it's really enjoyable to see what you've been up to. And we end up getting very interested in what you've been doing, and start picking up on unusual aspects of the projects, which you've probably already forgotten about. You tend to put these things behind you. So we'll tend to be approaching these things with an inquiring mind and wanting to understand more, and sort of engaging with your technical guys about the projects that you've been doing and what's been technically complicated about that. So once we've got that and we've uncovered that potential R&D work, then it's fairly quick to actually wrap up things in terms of case studies and on the technical side of things. And then off it goes to the accounts team, and they'll pull the financial side of things together. So obviously, with things as they are, we've been dealing with it largely by virtual conversations, with the odd site visit here and there. But we'll normally have that initial scoping or project ID call in the beginning, which again, as we mentioned, is critical, especially in this scenario. And then once we have a good feel for what warrants further discussion, we'll then have a follow-on chat with the relevant technical professionals. And again, this, and well, for me at least, ends up being quite informal and chatty, because you know that the work is there, and it's really just about getting the right amount of detail for Hmrc, which again kind of feeds back to the earlier question about the technical documents. We need to know enough, but without giving Hmrc too much to kind of overload them. They want to know that your thought process is right and you get what they're actually after.
Okay, thanks for that. I guess one other question would be, from me to you guys, is if you had 3 key bits of advice, obviously try and keep it relatively short, for ACE members. Because I guess the first point would have to be, if you don't ask, you don't give Hmrc the opportunity of giving you money. And I guess the best way to do that would be to talk to ForrestBrown in particular. So what would be the 3 key bits of advice in order to assess whether you think it's worthwhile? I know, Jenny, you said, yes, it's worthwhile anyway. And I guess that would be the first port of call.
Yeah, I think the first point would be, if you're not claiming, then absolutely make sure that you understand why and that you've bottomed out that you definitely aren't eligible to claim. So we come across many businesses who they've maybe looked into it and they've been put off for whatever reason, but what we find is they don't understand why they're not claiming, and that why is really important, because it means if you start a project that will qualify in the future, you can identify that you're starting qualifying activity and you've got scope to make a claim in the future. Point 2 for me would be, if you are claiming but it's a drag and you dread it, then there's a better way to claim. So have a look at your process and see if you can work with an advisor or a consultant who can make that process less of a drag. And my third point, because it's me, would be, if anything that we've said today has just kind of eaten away at the back of your mind and suggests, you know, maybe there are some doubts about the robustness of your claim or whether you're maximizing the value, then now would be the time to go and check and to make sure that you're confident in what you're claiming.
Anybody else got anything? No? Gareth?
Yeah, look, I think Jenny's covered it very nicely there. I mean, I guess just from a technical side, but I guess it's more on the broader side of things, it's just that collaboration, really. So, you know, we're here to work with your technical professionals, and it's a collaborative process, a collaborative conversation that we have in terms of being able to apply that filter to your projects, being able to really carefully discern which is qualifying activity, which is not, and then putting that together in the correct manner to send to Hmrc. So again, it's a, to me, it should be a pleasant and collaborative experience, and we're here to work with the professionals to get that right.
Okay, I think we're just about run out of time. Jack, could you do me a favour? I think at the end there's a slide of other activities that are coming up. Many thanks for everybody for listening. I hope you found it very informative, and as I said previously, if you've got any specific questions or you want to talk direct to ForrestBrown, then feel free to do so. If you need to, then get in touch with me. My email is iparker@acenet.co.uk, or alternatively go to the AC affiliate section on the website. There'll be the details there, and I think Jenny's details was already shown up on there. Thanks to Jenny Tragner, Gareth Randall and Jack Wanstall, but I just want to leave you with a reminder that we do have other webinars coming up. There they are now on the screen. And don't worry about today's webinar if you didn't quite take it all in, or you want to go back and look at it, or you want to get it on to other, pass it on to other colleagues, then it will be out later on today. You will get a link from that, so you'll be able to do whatever you wish with it, and hopefully it will be very fruitful for you in the near future. So once again, thanks everybody for listening, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.